People ask me all the time, what do you think is the biggest driver of sustainable change? Easy, consumer demand.
Wes Carter, president of Atlantic Packaging, founder of a New Earth Project.
Nothing will shift the supply chain faster than consumer demand. And I believe you influence consumer demand more out of stoke than out of fear. So I want people stoked about sustainable packaging, not terrified of non-sustainable packaging. A little bit of healthy fear in certain areas and disgust at what we've done to the earth is a good motivator. But ultimately, I think the energy of health and joy and success are much greater drivers of change.
Welcome to the Marketing Factor podcast. I'm your host, Austin Dandridge, the CEO of Cobble Hill. Today, I'm joined by Wes Carter, the third generation leader and president of Atlantic Packaging, North America's largest privately held packaging company. Wes is not only driving Atlantic's cutting edge technological innovations in sustainable packaging, but he's also spearheading the company's commitment to environmental stewardship. As a lifelong surfer and outdoorsman, Wes uniquely bridges the gap between the packaging industry and environmental conservation. He launched a New Earth Project to be the inspiration driving this movement into the future. A New Earth Project is a strategic collaboration between outdoor enthusiasts and global packaging suppliers with a mission to rid the world's oceans, lakes, and rivers of plastic pollution. Wes, thank you so much for coming on the Marketing Factor. Excited to talk to you. You are a podcast host yourself, or you've been on many podcasts before. I forget exactly your tie to the podcast world, but I know you have I know a New Earth Project definitely has a podcast. You host one as well?
Yeah, I've been on both sides of the microphone. I hosted a wellness podcast a few years back called Wellness at Work, which was really about how to incorporate wellness practices into a corporate environment and how to create innovative wellness programs that really had impact on employees. And I did that for several years. Today, I tend to be on this side, being interviewed a lot. But yes, we do have a podcast as part of a New Earth Project that is spearheaded by Chris Morrow out of Southern California. That's a lot about, what's happening in the world of sustainability around the country and around the world.
Well, super excited to dive into a New Earth Project, but tell me a little bit about your background, Atlantic Packaging, how you got into the industry. I know it's you're third generation owner of the business. Love to kind of hear the backstory.
Sure. We've got a really unique story. My grandfather started Atlantic Packaging in 1947. We actually began as a weekly newspaper of all things in a little town called Tabor City, North Carolina, which is just inland of Myrtle Beach. There's a really long and dynamic story about my grandfather and his newspaper, but I'll give you the brief little overview. Basically, he was a young man, started this weekly newspaper in this small town, just reporting on tobacco farming news back in the late 40s. But pretty quickly, he became aware that the Ku Klux Klan was really active in that community. And my grandfather was a power of the pen, God and country kind of guy. And he took it upon himself to fight the Klan with his newspaper. So he began writing scathing editorials and publishing articles about all of their activities in the community. And that was a really dangerous thing to do. They threatened to kill him. They threatened to kidnap his children, burn down his house. What his wife and three young kids went through was pretty profound. But my grandfather was really committed to doing the right thing. And even in the face of that great adversity, he continued on. Eventually, his editorials got picked up by larger newspapers. And finally, the FBI contacted him and said, "We'd like you to help us infiltrate the Klan," which is exactly what they did. Eventually, the FBI arrested over 300 Klansmen, including the Grand Dragon of the Carolinas Ku Klux Klan. And when that happened, it really broke their back. I mean, they were never the same organization in the Southeast. And my grandfather and his newspaper won a Pulitzer Prize for meritorious public service in 1952. And he was the first weekly newspaper to ever win a Pulitzer and he was only 32 years old at the time. So that is the origin story of Atlantic Packaging.
I had no idea. Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. There's actually a great documentary on PBS called The Editor and the Dragon that's about my grandfather's story. Most of it was filmed when he was still living. So he's in it as an 80-year-old or 88-year-old man. Morgan Freeman actually narrated it. So you can find it on YouTube. You can find it actually on a New Earth Project's YouTube channel now. You can watch it for free there. It's a great story. There's also obviously a lot more details in that story. But I like to introduce Atlantic. Obviously we're really proud of that history. It also, my grandfather used the little, company and newspaper that he built to do something really good for the world. He used business as a vehicle for driving a moral mission. And I believe that really set the tone for our organization. I think it established what I like to believe is the soul of our company. And the work that we do today, even though it's a lot different than fighting a vigilante group like the Klan, it still is really driven by a committed moral compass and about being really honest about the world that we live in and using the resources we have as organizations and companies to do good in the world. And, we're by no means perfect, but that's what we aim for every day at Atlantic. Just a really quick little bridge. A lot of people wonder how a newspaper became the largest privately held packaging company in North America. It was actually a very logical progression. In those days, if you were in the newspaper business in small town America, you were also in the paper supply business. So it's sort of the second part of my grandfather's career after he won the Pulitzer was he started this sort of adjacent business selling paper supplies to local businesses, which were primarily apparel and textile companies that were moving from the Northeast, from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, You're in the Carolinas, a lot of the hosiery business, that turned into companies like Hanes Brands and folks like that. So we started selling converted paperboard to those companies. And pretty soon they asked my grandfather to sell them boxes and tape and bags. And so packaging for the apparel industry was a lot of what Atlantic did very regionally, back in the 60s. And then my father, Rusty, came on board in the early 70s. My dad didn't care much for the newspaper business, but he's a serial entrepreneur and really took the packaging business to a whole lot of different levels. My grandfather actually continued to publish the newspaper and then went on to be a pretty prolific outdoor writer in Florida. He wrote probably 25 books about freshwater fishing in Florida and thousands of articles for Field and Stream and Florida Sportsman. And back in the 80s, that was the grandfather that I grew up with was an outdoor writer, while my dad was running the Atlantic Packaging that, evolved into the organization that we are today. So certainly the breadth and the scale of Atlantic has all been on the back of my father. So I like to say if my grandfather is the heart of the organization, my father is certainly the hands. He really built the organization into what it is today.
Yeah, just kind of scaling that to the mainstream and having your dad kind of take what your grandfather had built and really see opportunity for success there. What was kind of the tipping point for that? Like now you're the largest privately owned in the world or in
North America. Yeah.
In North America.
There are, packaging is such a vast industry that it's a little bit like, how do you categorize, packaging? But in the space that we occupy, we're the largest in North America and certainly one of the largest in the world. And we support the packaging needs today of major consumer products companies and retail brands in pretty much every industry vertical: food, beverage, building products, automotive, aerospace, e-commerce is our fastest growing vertical. Companies like Coca-Cola and Procter & Gamble and Sunoco and Amazon, Urban Outfitters, Dick's Sporting Goods. Pretty much anybody making or distributing, any kind of consumer good are a potential customer for us. And, you sort of asked about like the pivot point. My father made a real strategic decision in the mid 90s that he did not want to be a commodities broker, which was a lot of what packaging companies were back then, just sort of a middleman. But what he made a strategic decision that in order to be more than a commodities broker, we needed to have a more comprehensive value proposition. And so he made investments in a sophisticated packaging equipment and technical support infrastructure, which is a lot about people, like hiring people that were skilled engineers who could sell packaging equipment. Because in those days, like coming out of the 80s and in the 90s, automation was becoming a very big deal, And so the way that we really grew a lot is, even though we were pretty regional back then, primarily just the Carolinas, we started getting the attention of pretty sophisticated companies because we had this really dynamic equipment program. And originally it was sort of the razor blade model. We're selling equipment to sell materials and package those two things together. But what evolved out of that is we began to really understand how to create long-term value by optimizing the performance of the machine and the material and creating the merger of those things. And so when I joined the company in the early 2000s, what we talked a lot about was we are the packaging optimization guys. We're the guys that go into a manufacturing environment, audit every part of the packaging process, and give recommendations on how to improve efficiencies and reduce their overall packaging spend. So a packaging optimization is just another word for packaging efficiency, or if you want to get really base level, use less. And you do that through technology. So the company that I came into in the early 2000s after I got out of school in Chapel Hill, that was the business that we were in, was the packaging optimization business. I became the president of Atlantic. I've been doing this 20 plus years now, almost 25, probably 10 years ago. And I built our sustainability program in collaboration with our leadership on top of that optimization value proposition. Because ultimately, like, use less from a sustainability perspective is always the right answer. And then it was like, we just got to take it a step further and get really mindful about the materials themselves and start to consider end of life scenarios and those kind of things. So that was sort of the natural progression of newspaper to technical packaging company to sustainable packaging company.
Well, I mean, that does that through line of taking it from using less to the sustainability aspect, which you kind of cherish as kind of the brand message right now. It seems to me, at least from a New Earth project, is very clear in kind of what you're saying. How do you, if I think of as a business there is still a level of, you want to sell more, right? So how do you think about the role of sustainability there with the economic factor of trying to sell more product? How do those things work together? And I guess how do you develop, a marketing strategy around something like that too? Because you're ultimately trying to sell more product, I would assume, but
Sure.
You're also trying to be sustainable.
Well, we're trying to sell more product, but it doesn't mean that I'm trying to create inflation, or artificial inflation in materials. What we're trying to grow market share. We grow our business through, we have such a powerful, comprehensive value proposition that helps our customers control cost and become more sustainable. So if I do that really well in one product group, then I get opportunities to do the same thing for a single customer in multiple product groups. And we've got lots of examples of that. I mean, some of our most dynamic relationships where we're selling thousands of items to these companies, or maybe that may be a little much, hundreds maybe, started with one, and we delivered really sustainable, comprehensive, controllable value. And they said, golly, you guys did such a good job with us in this area of packaging. Will you look at these other 12 areas or other 20 areas? And so today, if you look at our top 100 customers, they're all very comprehensive in nature, where we're, selling equipment and materials and doing technical service. And, about 30% of our business is in products that we manufacture. And so they're buying what we call value added products that we're making. And so we grow our business through dynamic, comprehensive relationships with customers, and then growing market share by having a really good, authentic and ethical reputation in the business. And ultimately that keeps our business healthy. I mean, packaging's a little bit like food. I mean, at least from where I can sit, I don't see a world without packaging, but I do see a world without non-sustainable packaging. I do see a world without toxicity, and that's not just in packaging, it's in a lot of things. Ultimately, what I want our company to represent is health, first and foremost. And you talked about a through line earlier. Today, the through line is health. Like I mentioned early on, it began with a comprehensive health and wellness program. I wanted to bring the resources that I had had in my life, from yoga instructors to therapists to doctors and everything in between. I was fortunate enough to have a lot of those resources in my own personal life, and it enhanced my life so much. I wanted to bring that into the corporate environment and find a way to offer it to 2,000 employees. Ultimately that culture of health that grew from that, it started to become an outer reflection. This inner commitment to health and well-being within our organization started to translate into our value proposition, because ultimately sustainability is about creating a healthier supply chain. And today in our world, if all companies would pull up a seat at the negotiating table for healthy life, I think it can change the world. And that's what we're trying to do. Every decision that we make of any consequence, I'm asking myself, is this supportive of health? And if it's not, then I pull way back, and I try to find another way. And that's relatively new. I mean, and being privately held, I have the ability to think long term. I don't have shareholders. I don't have a board of directors, and that does give me a level of flexibility that a lot of organizations just simply don't have. But I do believe our whole supply chain and materials economy can really evolve, and I think the world and the earth is asking us to do that.
Yeah, it's an unusual industry that you're in, that I would imagine that health and wellness is not usually on the forefront of what people's mission and values are for that type of business. So how do you incorporate that, and how have you incorporated that into the business as itself? Like, taking that idea of health, how do you communicate that to your team?
First of all, you have to live it. And this may sound like a funny answer, but you have to be really vulnerable. I had to be willing to share publicly, really, my journey with health and wellness. And it wasn't all pretty, like the gnarly parts, especially, doing a lot of deep spiritual work. And, but I came to believe that leadership really is about vulnerability. And I wanted people that worked at Atlantic to understand that I'm a human being too. And my journey with health has not been a straight line. It's zigzagged all over the place, and it's doubled back on top of itself a few times. But ultimately, I made a lot of discoveries along the road, but one of them is that, abundance in life comes from health. And if we don't have health, it's very hard to have anything else. And the healthier I am and the more balanced I am, the more, the more things that I can bring to this world. The more creative I can be. And that's what I've tried to model. And again, I've had to be, open about my experience. And then ultimately, I think when leaders acknowledge, that they're human beings too, and we're all on this journey together, that's something people can get behind. I think for too long in our culture, we've sort of created these paradigms that leaders need to be perfect and need to have, and they can't ever deviate. Like that was the other thing I learned. Like, if you want to be a great leader, focus on being adaptable. We live in a dynamic world. Things are changing all the time. When I first started, sustainability wasn't even on my radar, and it would have been very easy for me to reject it. A lot of companies have and continue to, That would have been the easier route, is to say, forget, it's too disruptive for my business. I'm going to keep doing it this way. But I've learned to be adaptable. There's new information. And some of that new information was freaking plastic pollution in the lineup where I like to surf. I'm like, do I want to just put my head in the sand or, in the ocean and not acknowledge that, the supply chain that I'm a part of is creating this problem? I couldn't do that. So I adapted, and I adapted with the help of a lot of people at Atlantic, who believed that this was a direction that we could go and make impact.
Was that a hard sell at first, or did it feel like you were pushing against momentum? Because like you said, it seems like a difficult, the easy way was just to continue down the non-sustainable route. But did you have to do a lot of convincing?
There was skepticism. There was skepticism by certain, I won't call out names, but there was certain skepticism by longer term stakeholders within the organization that said, hey, this is the way we've operated for a really long time. It's been really successful. This is a pretty big, gamble, and one of the things I also realized, in order to do this well, I had to be super honest. And part of being honest was acknowledging that our industry had created a lot of these problems. And it's pretty unpopular to call out your own industry as a leader in that industry. And I had to be willing to do that. However, I will say the energy that I felt and continue to feel, the inspiration, the passion, came from somewhere, deep inside of me, and also from outside of me. Like there was this energy, and there continues to be this surge of positive energy that, like, this is the way, like health is the way. And I felt like the more I committed to it, the more opportunities came my way, and the more the easier it got to find like-minded people and find people who wanted to be a part of it. And all of a sudden, I started, as an example, I started getting resumes from some amazing humans that were like, hey, I'd love to be a part of your organization. What you're doing is really transformational. And so, it allowed me to continue to expand the sophistication of the humans. And ultimately, I think, what do people really want? What do humans really want in their life? They want purpose. Like, we all want to believe that especially, work is a big part of life. Your professional endeavors are a big part of what you do every day. And when you can give people a platform that has foundational purpose, they bring their A game, and they have endless energy for it. And from that perspective, it's been easy. Like I sometimes say it, and in some ways it's been the easiest thing I've ever done. I've just continued to follow the breadcrumbs, try to bring my best self every day, and also being fully aware that I don't have all the answers, and that I need a lot of help from a lot of other human beings that have complementary talents to my own.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that you are mindful of that, but also that you just committed to this and you're continuing to stay down that path. From where did a New Earth project come into your kind of idea? When was that idea formed, and what is that business, and how is it different from Atlantic Packaging?
December the 26th of 2020 at about 3:00 in the afternoon. I remember the exact moment in time. So up to that point, I had been pretty outspoken about sustainability for several years. And with social media and LinkedIn, like, I was posting a lot about the need for our industry to make these shifts. And one of my sales guys had a good buddy who was in the branding and marketing business who was following me on social media. He happened to work for Hurley, the surf brand, back in the 90s. And he called me one day, a guy named Darren Doan, and said, Wes, I think what you're doing in sustainability is really interesting and different than what I've heard from your industry before. And when I worked at Hurley, there was a guy there named Peter King, who was actually the first professional surfer that Bob Hurley ever signed. But he worked at the brand with me in the 90s. He's now a photographer on the North Shore. And he called me recently and said that surf films are dead, and we need to find a way to bring a resurgence of surf films. But he really felt like it was time for the surfing community to come around together around a common cause around ocean conservation and this whole idea of surfing with a purpose. And so Peter's talking to Darren about that, and Darren's like, you know what, you should talk to Wes Carter. I think that there's some alignment between your relationships on the North Shore and what Wes is doing, and he loves surfing. And so Peter and I had a call the day after Christmas. I was in Park City, Utah with my family on a ski vacation, and Peter was on the North Shore, and we had about a 3-hour Zoom call, and it was pretty much fireworks. I had just finished reading Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth, and that book blew my mind. And so, he asked me what I wanted to call it if we did this initiative, and A New Earth Project was right on the tip of my tongue, and it stuck. And the idea that Peter and I had was, what if we engaged the surfing community, the surfing brands, the shapers, the pro surfers around sustainability? And we'll use the infrastructure of Atlantic to create sustainable surfboard packaging and create a little documentary series about eliminating single-use plastic from surfboard packaging. Now, that's not a big vertical in packaging. Like, all the surfboard packaging in the world, is, not a huge vertical compared to a lot of the customers we dealt with. But it was a great way to tell a story. And ultimately, a surfboard was just a widget. It was like, if we can do this for surfboards, we can do it for anything. But doing it with surfboards is just interesting, and I found myself on Kelly Slater's back porch interviewing him, and we had people like Carissa Moore that were giving us input, and Kai Lenny, Ben Bourgeois, who's a great friend of mine now from Wrightsville Beach, who was a pro surfer in the early 2000s. I mean, all these people just started coming out of the woodworks. Koa Smith, saying, I love what y'all are doing. I want to be a part of it. And so the first real part of A New Earth Project was it's really about marketing and, sustainability, and basically telling the world, like, sustainable packaging is awesome, and it can be awesome. And, when you got guys like Kelly Slater saying it's awesome, it helps a lot. And so we've expanded into the snow vertical and mountain biking and the rod and gun vertical. I got passions for all those things. I'm a hunter, I'm a fisherman, I'm a snowboarder.
Yeah.
And it's connected me with some radical human beings that have really enriched my life. And I was just in Jackson, Wyoming for the last 2 days with Travis Rice, who's arguably the greatest snowboarder of all time. And, he's super stoked on everything we're doing. And he started the Natural Selection Snowboarding Tour, and I'm on the board there with him now. And it's just amazing to be in community with people like Kelly and Travis and other, Kimmy Fasani is a great snowboarder, and Kai Lenny and all these people, who have a really big audience and are saying it's time for the world to wake up. And the hope is that, and this has started to happen, that we create, we convince retail brands that sustainable packaging is a brand attribute, and your consumers, especially young consumers, are judging you ethically on your packaging. And so we want influencers, athletes, musicians, celebrities, to endorse sustainable packaging for the good of the planet, to help drive this change. And we want the organizations that embrace this to market it, and say, this is what we're doing as an organization. And they're not, and today, A New Earth Project has migrated well beyond the outdoor space, where we're selling New Earth approved packaging to a lot of, traditional endemic packaging customers of Atlantic, from Coca-Cola to Procter & Gamble to Williams-Sonoma.
I love the idea of creating, the groundswell of support for the industry and moving it towards sustainability. Is there a way that you're kind of monitoring that, or is it just a gut feeling that you're hoping to get from this? Are there key metrics that you're looking towards when let's say, for example, that you're trying to make a business decision on what to do next for a New Earth project? Are you looking at, let's take the surfers, for example, that that are supportive of the brand and that you support? Are you coming up with some sort of like cost benefit analysis on how this makes sense?
Well, obviously, for every product that we innovate sustainable packaging around. And sometimes it can be very simple, like we're going to replace bubble wrap with a type of accordion cut paper for cushioning, swap out one, swap in another. Other times, like for single surfboards, that took us like 4 or 5 months to figure out, because not only, surfboard has to be shipped without damage, but we also needed something that was easy to pack. Because most of this stuff's being done, in the back of a shapers. They don't have a lot of space. We couldn't increase the shipping cost. Surfboards are already expensive to ship. So we're having to look at all these different, criteria to create a solution. There is a lot of work that goes into it. But to your question, are there metrics? Well, one of the metrics is people buying it, and as an example, just a few months ago, Firewire, which is one of the largest producers of surfboards in the world, transitioned all of their surfboard packaging for North America to New Earth approved packaging that we designed. And we're working with dozens of surfboard company. Album, you guys probably very familiar with Album. Great creative. Matt Parker's an amazing dude. He was one of our early adopters. John Pazell, we worked with him from the very beginning. Rusty, Stewart, and as a surfer, like to see our packaging, wrapped around like, Stewart longboards and, a Pazell Ghost. It gets me off, man. I'm so into it. So there's those metrics, we look at it. But then, a lot of our customers have, as an example, plastic mitigation goals. Like we wanted to decrease our single-use plastic by 50% by 2030. Williams Sonoma was one of our early adopters, and they came to us and they said, we're based in San Francisco. We know sustainability. We wanted to be a part of our brand. We recognize that our packaging is emblematic of our environmental ethics. And so over a very quick amount of time, actually last year, first quarter, like first 90 days of the year, we transitioned them out of all bubble wrap, inflatable air pillows, foam packaging to all fiber-based curbside recyclable packaging. And that eliminated 400,000 pounds of single-use plastic annually. And we knew it. We knew how much they were buying. We transitioned. We knew how much went away. Typically we're substituting sustainable packaging or making a transition from non-sustainable packaging. So the metrics are right there. Amazon just announced, and we don't service this side of their business because of the volumes are immense. But they just announced they were eliminating 15 billion pounds of single-use plastic as an organization. And a lot of that, they're doing that to promote sustainability as a core value to their customers, and ultimately people ask me all the time, what do you think is the biggest driver of sustainable change? Easy. Consumer demand. Nothing will shift the supply chain faster than consumer demand. And I believe you influence consumer demand more out of stoke than out of fear. So like I want people stoked about sustainable packaging, not terrified of non-sustainable packaging. A little bit of healthy fear in certain areas and disgust at what we've done to the earth is a good motivator. But ultimately, I think the energy of health and joy and success are much greater drivers of change.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, we work with a lot of, the majority of the businesses we work with are e-commerce businesses. And when I think about how they promote their business, it's very rare that they're promoting, the sustainable packaging that they're shipping the product itself in. But
they should be.
But they should be. But what does move the needle a little bit is the way that the product looks when people unbox it, or the way that the shipping cost being quick and fast and cheaper or something like that. Is there a way to marry that sort of messaging into how e-commerce brands kind of promote through sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned before, like the packaging optimization methodology that we've been doing for 30 years now, is still fundamental. Like, I mean, when we are innovating packaging and when we are creating sustainable packaging solutions, cost is always the top of the list, because there's a lot of products out there that are more sustainable, but they're 10, 12x the price, and it doesn't mean that we don't want to continue to invest in those materials and work to bring the cost down. But most brands are not going to pay, even 2x. So yeah, I mean, I like to say if it costs too much, it's not very sustainable because no one's going to buy it. So we have to find practical, economically viable, sustainable options, and we're really good at that. There's a lot of ways to take out cost, but you have to look at cost holistically. We can't look at 1 ounce of material versus another ounce of material. We have to, like, as an example, with the surfboard packaging, the traditional way of packaging surfboards with bubble wrap and tape and foam for most of the shapers, was a 20-minute process. Our process takes 3 minutes. Well, that's a big cost savings. You can, ship out a board in 3 minutes versus 20, and there's a lot of examples of packaging efficiency. And then, most of the FedEx, UPS, they charge now by dimensional weight. So if we can find ways to reduce the amount of air in a package, boxes that are right sized to the package itself, we can bring down the dimensional weight. In some cases, the freight savings can offset the material increase if there is one. So we're always looking at that whole ecosystem of cost to deliver sustainable value. And when we hit those marks, we have great success. And things are broadly adopted.
When the way that the business, the Atlantic Packaging, is structured, is it, how much time and effort and, percentage of the workforce is dedicated to the R&D side of things?
Dedicated. I mean, we are so organic in the way that we are structured. And we really don't have a lot of silos. There's so much collaboration across the company. I mean, we don't even have any layers of management. I mean, we don't even have titles on our business cards. I mean, everyone's sort of on the same team. Yeah. We do have a packaging solutions center in Charlotte, North Carolina, that is sort of our anchor for innovation. And we certainly have a staff of people there. If I had to take a rough guess, there's probably 40 people dedicated to the solution center, packaging development and testing. That number's hard for me to pin because we're hiring people all the time for that operation. Now, we have 150 employees in Charlotte at our location there, but 40 or 50 are dedicated to the solution center. And so we're not only developing packaging, we're also doing a lot of package testing. A lot of customers, when they're making changes from one type of packaging to another, are really concerned about damage. And so we have a lot of really sophisticated ways to certify that the packaging is fit to ship. And we do all that, transport testing in-house, so they don't have to just do, field testing, which is a lot more expensive. So that all happens under the Charlotte ecosystem. And most of our customers are a part of that. We bring their representatives to Charlotte to be a part of what we're doing because they know their products better than we do. So it's what makes it really fun. It's real collaborative.
When you talk about, your business philosophy, it sounds like is a pretty flat organization, or you don't have titles on your business cards. Was that always the case, or is that something that you integrated into the business?
No, I mean, that's all about my father, Rusty. He deserves all the credit. I mean, my dad always wanted Atlantic to be a sales organization that was customer focused. And what he saw as the downfall of a lot of organization is as they got bigger, they got bureaucratic. And as they got bigger, they felt like they needed more and more layers of checks and balances. And it just makes companies slow, or it can. And so it's always been very, very intentional. Like my dad liked to say, operational excellence was never his goal. And he said, we're always going to have a little slop because we are so flat, but we're going to outrun the slop with our sales effort. And, as we've gotten larger and larger, the slop gets larger and larger. So we do focus more on our operations today than we ever have before. And we want to be lean, and we want to eliminate waste and things like that. But ultimately, we want to be nimble, and we want to be creative, and we want to be innovative. And I don't know about you, but I don't operate very creatively in a box. Like if I want to be creative, like put me out there on the creek, or, in the ocean or in a duck blind, let me get out there in nature and think creatively. So we try to foster that same sort of energy within our organization as best we can.
Yeah. I mean, I'm interested in that because it's, I'm interested in your journey to get to where you are now, because I feel like the Wes that I first met 15 years ago is much different than the Wes I know now. And there's your experience through, you talk a lot about it in emotional healing and stuff. It seems that can have such a positive impact on business, right? And it seems that more CEOs and business owners and, just everyone is waking up to this health crisis that we live in, from, whether it's anxiety or, drinking and drugs or whatever it could be. And there is like a more awareness now than feels like there's ever been around this stuff. And people are committed to this sort of, healing process, both themselves, but also kind of it extending in towards their business as well. I'm interested like where that started for you and how that journey kind of took place and what the evolution of it has been.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the journey, the journey to the self, for me has been the most profound journey I've been in my whole life. And, anything that I've accomplished professionally has been a direct result of personal work, and it's hard. And it requires a level of courage, and it requires a level of vulnerability. But, we all carry wounds, human beings, we carry wounds, and those wounds impact how we show up in the world. And for a lot of my early life, the things from my past and my insecurities and my anxieties had a huge impact on the way I showed up in the world. And sometimes it meant I hid from the world or, tried to check out. Other times it meant I acted from a place of anger or short-sightedness. But, for most of my early life, I guess like most people, it was just a way of being. I just, some days you're pissed off and some days you're not. And you're just sort of in that, roller coaster all the time. And, it initially started for me by walking into a yoga classes, believe it or not. I walked into Blue Turtle Yoga in Charleston, 16 or 17 years ago. And that practice immediately resonated with me. After one class, I was like, damn, this is for me. And back then in Charleston, there were not a lot of men doing yoga. I mean, I routinely was the only guy in the class with 25 women. I mean, routinely. And then today, like hell, if you go to a yoga class in Charleston or anywhere else, usually there's oftentimes more men than women. I mean, that practice is really integrated, at least from a gender perspective. But one of the great things about yoga, especially because I was going to a lot of traditional yoga studios, I was getting a lot of spiritual teachings. I mean, the Eastern philosophy, the Buddhist philosophy, the Hindu philosophy, a lot. And what I started to find was my favorite yoga teachers were the ones that were incorporating that ancient knowledge, and a lot of that knowledge is about mastering the mind. Ultimately yoga is about, purging a lot of these energies through our body and our nervous system to calm our minds so we can better hear the intuitive voice or the voice of our soul, as I understand it today, and so yoga really started me on that trajectory. But the big breakthrough for me was psychedelic plant medicine. When I found plant medicine, and it was sort of by accident, it was really a curiosity. a very close friend of mine was like, hey man, I know you're sort of into alternative forms of healing, and I found something I think you're really going to like. And I had, recreational psychedelic experiences in my past, but I was super curious. And so when I finally started doing that work in a therapeutic environment, it was mind blowing for me. It opened me up to another level of understanding of what it just means to be a human being. That was so profound for me that I really never looked back. And so I've been on that journey for almost a decade now, and it has, along with a lot of other modalities. I mean, I do a lot of, body work and energy work. I still do yoga. Weightlifting actually was really a big thing for me, like learning to really lift weights properly and starting to understand that like my nervous system doesn't really know the difference between physical weight and emotional weight, and like just learning to be a more robust human being emotionally, spiritually, physically. The plant medicine for me, like, helped me get to the layers inside of me that my conscious mind didn't want to look at, because medicine's really good for that. It like removes that conscious mind that, that's not allowing you to look at those places. And then I had to walk into those caves that were often scary, but there was always liberation there, and I was able to understand that some of the ways I showed up in the world that I wasn't really proud of were ultimately based on just gnarly stuff that had happened to me in the past, or ignorance, and I was able to forgive myself, and start making better choices, and like I said, it wasn't a straight line it still isn't. But it enhanced my life, and it started to, and that's where I really started to see like, holy shit, this is about health. This is about health. If you want abundance in your life, and it's not just about eating well and going for a jog, it's about that deep connection to what you truly are, which is spirit, and like, once I started to understand that, the 3D matrixy stuff of the world just didn't impact me in the same way. It's like moving from playing a finite game to an infinite game. And things like purpose, I didn't have to look for those things anymore. They just showed up. I just intuitively started to better understand how to direct my life, really in the direction of love, love, health, healing, connection. But I never was going to get there until I resolved the conflict within me, and plant medicine helped me immensely with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, when you say that sort of trajectory definitely influences how you approach, your well-being, but also how you treat others. And that is definitely a reflection from a business standpoint too, of how you get treated in return, right? And you've been able to kind of, it seems like, generate new ideas through love, quote unquote, and following that path and following your intuition and letting your ego go. And to me, that is like without your, first step into that yoga studio, that probably wouldn't have happened. And New Earth Project probably wouldn't have been created in a way.
No, it absolutely would not. I mean, like, a New Earth Project and all of this was a direct reflection of this work for me. Like, it, again, like I mentioned before, like, sustainability ultimately is about how to create a healthy supply chain. And, like, I couldn't be focused on my own. The other thing that medicine really helped me with, and this work really helped me with, is to understand that the most sacred thing on this planet is life itself. Like, life, like, we are here for the purpose of living, and I started to see the sacredness in all life all around me. And so being in a position to help steward life, to help change the trajectory of myopic progression that had created all of these problems in our world that was impacting life negatively, it was so obvious. I was like, duh, this is what I'm supposed to do. And then once I started directing my life in that direction, it got beautiful, it got rewarding and lovely, and it was inspiring to other people. And I'm one person with limited talents. I mean, I've got some just like everybody else, but what started happening, like I mentioned before, is all these amazing people, some who were already within the organization, some from outside, said, I want to help too. And I'm really good at this, and I'm really good at that. And to me, that is the real joy when you start to focus on a mission that's truly good, is you get to harmonize the talents and the gifts of all of your people together. And it becomes a team. It's something we do together. It's not about Wes Carter. It's not about, one of our VPs. It's not, it's about us as a team. And ultimately as just humans, like how do human beings awaken to the sacredness of life and transition our world into a world that honors and stewards life and healthy life in every single thing that we do. And to me, like, that is the human story that we are making right now. We're creating that story right now. And I believe it can bring great joy for humanity, but we got a lot of work to do, and packaging, for whatever reason, I mean, it's not the sexiest thing in the world, but it is very tangible and visible, and it's ubiquitous. So like in some ways, packaging is kind of a perfect place to focus on because everyone gets to participate. Like sometimes it's hard to participate in, like, how do I impact the rise of artificial intelligence? Shit, I don't know how to do that. How do I impact the threat of nuclear proliferation around the world? I don't know how to do that. But like everybody can participate in the plastic pollution crisis and reversing that, if we commit to a healthy supply chain and to bringing products to market that are more in balance with nature.
Well, man, I love the story. I love the openness to share that. The commitment to sustainability is incredible. And hopefully we can convince our clients to promote sustainable packaging as one of the key selling points of their products as well. Wes, it's been awesome having you on. Where can people find you?
Yep, you can find me online. I'm very active on social media. I actually believe that social media is a incredible tool for sharing information and inspiring movements and missions. So we use it a lot. So you can find me on LinkedIn, just Wes Carter, Atlantic Packaging. You'll find me. I'm also on Instagram at Wes M. Carter. You can also follow A New Earth Project on Instagram, A New Earth Project. You can also check out our website, anewearthproject.com. Our documentary series is on there, and we have a field notes section that's like a blog that we're always updating. We have a newsletter you can sign up for there as well. So yeah, and then, if you're looking for me in the flesh, I'm usually, out at Bohicket Creek with my family. And then I like to paddle out for a surf on a pretty regular basis. Yeah, those are the good places to find me.
Right on, man. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Austin. Pleasure.